Joining us now for her second of 5 appearances this week on the agenda, Janice Stein from the Munk School of Global Affairs. You're here to talk China, growth, wealth, and power all week long. Janice, welcome back.
Pleasure.
I want to start by talking about China's increasing appetite for the natural resources of this planet, and to that end, let's talk about oil. Here is the voracious appetite of the top 4 jurisdictions in the world as it relates to oil. Oil imports in barrels per day, the United States of America, of course, number 1 at 13 million plus. The European Union, over 8.5 million. Japan comes in at more than 5 million. And there's China at number 4, over 4 million barrels of oil per day. Okay, you see those numbers, what jumps out at you?
The astonishing growth in the Chinese demand for oil, which is going to grow more quickly, Steve, than either the Japanese demand, European demand, or the US demand for oil, as the Chinese economy continues to grow at a rate probably 5 times that of the United States for the next 3 or 4 years. The Japanese economy is barely limping along at all, and the European economy is likely to contract for the short-term future. So China will have the greatest appetite for new oil of any part of the world. One statistic, and one statistic only, China is currently consuming 40% of the resources that are traded in the world.
All of the natural resources of the world?
All of the natural resources. 40%.
And this is a country with 5 times the growth rate of the United States.
That's
and
right.
5 times the population.
That's right.
Who is supplying all of China's oil?
China is making deals around the world to guarantee its supply of oil and other natural resources. So where is it? It's in Central Asia, where it is in South America and Latin America, where, for example, it has made arrangements with Venezuela as a supplier of oil. It would like to be in Canada. We have been resistant. And the way China does this, there's 2 ways. One, the Chinese make long-term contractual arrangements for the supply of oil, and in return, they give development assistance without conditions. So, unlike the World Bank or the United States or the European Union, they don't say things like, you have to open up your political system, or we need an accountability audit at the end of 2 years about where our project money's been spent. They provide development assistance, or they invest significantly in nationalized oil companies so that they become a shareholder of these companies to assure themselves long-term supply. This is the biggest strategic concern that the Chinese leadership has.
They've kind of done that here, haven't they? They just put more than $800 million into the oil sands.
That's the first time that we've actually had serious Chinese investment in the oil patch in Canada. They would have liked to come in earlier, but that is a small example of the deals that China is making all over the world. Africa, which I didn't mention, is also a significant focus for China. So they are everywhere in the world. If you go to Africa now, Steve, the Chinese are the largest investors in African economies.
So this, presumably you mean Nigerian oil, they're all over that. Are they in the Middle East too? I guess they're in
They're in the Middle East too. They're in the Middle East too, and that, a lot of what you see, for instance, right now around the sanctions discussion coming out of China is very much a function of its trading relationship with Iran and its preoccupation with oil.
Now just tell me, one more follow-up on oil, because it sounds like they're taking a 2-track approach. On the one hand, sign these long-term contracts which don't require them to own a piece of the action. On the other hand, own if you can. Why the 2 different approaches?
I think that for the Chinese, the opportunity to diversify, to own a piece if you can, that's a great opportunity for technology transfer, for learning, because their people come over, get state-of-the-art knowledge, which again fits with the big Chinese objective of moving up the value chain. In countries where they're shut out and they're unable to do that, they then do long-term contracts.
Does Africa, or do the African countries where they're involved in things beyond oil, and in Latin America as well, do they like doing business with China?
For them, it's a dream come true.
It is, eh?
Right. Again, because there's no conditions attached to the development assistance that comes. So heavy infrastructure in Africa is virtually all being built now by the Chinese without conditions. The only difficulties that you hear when you talk to Africans about this is China often brings with it their own companies, their own labor, and there are tensions.
So it's not a no strings attached situation.
It's not a
Some
completely no. That's right. There are no strings attached in terms of demanding performance and accountability from African governments and Latin American governments. But there is a significant Chinese presence, and you actually hear about tensions on the ground between Chinese, for example, and Africans that live together. When there can be up to 1,000, a labor force of up to 1,000 Chinese concentrated in a village area in Africa. That's a significant presence on the ground.
Do we have any sense of how clean these deals are? Do we assume that there's just a lot of bribery that goes into getting these kinds of arrangements?
There's no way of knowing. The kind of transparency that we would expect around these deals is simply absent, frankly. There's no pressure on the Chinese side for transparency. The Chinese government doesn't really release reliable data on these. And depending on the government you're dealing with, either in Latin America or in Africa or in Kyrgyzstan or Tajikistan, they don't release the data
chances
either.
are you're dealing with a dictator somewhere along the line, aren't you?
So in a sense, you could argue that everybody benefits from these transactions and the Chinese secure their access to natural resources. Now, it is discouraging to Western governments who, for years, had the capacity to go in and say, here's the development assistance, but you do it our way.
Let me take you back into the classroom for a second here. Classic realist international relations theory holds that nations, of course, clash over competing interests. So who might China clash with, and over what resources?
There's two versions of this argument. Really classical realists will tell you that China will ultimately come up against other great powers as they struggle for resources. So let me give you just one example. The Japanese economy has always imported resources in order to sustain itself.
Because they don't have any.
They don't have any at all. They're neighbors, they're in close proximity one to the other, and as the Chinese appetite grows and the price it's willing to pay increases, there could be conceivably tensions between Japan and China. India is right behind China coming into the world market for resources. Take one example. If the Tata car takes off, this new reverse-engineered car that costs about $2,000. Just imagine the explosion in car ownership that there will be in India. The demand for oil, the demand for refined products, the demand for gas. The Chinese-Indian relationship is probably the tensest relationship right now anywhere, certainly with respect to China. And you could, if you're a realist and you look only for conflict, you could certainly see escalating tension between India and China.
So China, Japan, China, India, two things to watch very carefully. Okay. Let me read something from the New York Times that was in the paper a couple of months ago. This year, the percentage of China's population of working age people, that's 15 to 64, peaks at 71.9%, the culmination of a steady rise over 30 years. Together with the birth bulge, which preceded the introduction of the one-child policy in 1980, this increase drove workforce growth of 33% in 30 years and helped to fuel the export sweatshops of southern China. Another important marker is just 5 years away. The absolute size of the working age population will peak by 2015 and then decline gradually. We talked a bit about this yesterday, the notion that there may actually be labor shortages and the size of the workforce may be declining. Should Chinese officials, how concerned do you think they ought to be by this?
They should be very worried, Stephen, they are. China is an aging society.
As are we all.
Actually worse.
They're worse.
They're worse. Why are they worse? In an effort to get their population explosion under control, in the 1970s they began with a one-child policy. We're now 40 years on, so that one baby who was born is now 40. two parents who are 60, who are retired, because everybody retires at 50 in China, and they go to the park in the morning and they dance, which is actually lovely to see. That one child, married, only has one child. So if you do the demographics, you can imagine that that one child, the 20-year-old, has 4 grandparents and 2 parents to support who will soon be retired. 6 retired for 1 working person.
Well, except
That's
that
a nightmare.
I hear what you're saying. It's a demographic time bomb. It's
It is.
a problem in many areas. Except that a lot of people cheated and had more than one child, right?
Not enough.
Not enough people.
Not enough people cheated, and so Chinese social scientists, that is probably their biggest challenge. That's what they're working on. After the earthquake in China, the first thing the Chinese government did was allow people who lost a child in the earthquake to have not 1 but 2 new children. They are desperately looking for a way to let their population grow but not explode. So they can't say to everybody, have 2 kids, because that would recreate the very large explosive population and retard the movement out of poverty. But they know that if they continue with the one-child policy as it currently is, they will hit the wall. And
Okay.
you know the expression that summarizes this that you might hear? China will get old before it gets rich.
Yes. Well, I was just actually going to ask you about this because they're, of course, they're trying to move now to a more value-added economy,
Right.
where they're not just producing the cheap goods that people like to buy in various department stores here, but the higher-end stuff.
Right.
So is it possible China will get richer before it gets older?
It's a race.
It's a race.
It's a race. And again, you know, they're really, really, really good demographers in China who are doing the modeling all the time. So how do you escape this trap? If current trends continue as they are now unchanged, China will get old before it gets rich. So how do you change that? Well, one, you extend the retirement age, right? Right now everybody's forced out of the labor markets at 50, you up that 55, 60, you buy yourself another 10 years. 2, you will somehow relax this one-child policy to 1 1/4 or 1 1/2 children. So you allow some increased growth in the population. The third way, and this is what Chinese demographers are really working on, bring people in from the countryside into the cities. Shrink the agricultural sector, so you feed the manufacturing sector, and do what we did in Canada, which was allow land, the size of farms essentially to grow. And they've taken the first big step to do this. You can now trade land in communist China in the agricultural sector, and that's just 2 years old. Allow the size of farms to grow, become more efficient, so that the rural sector in China can produce a society that is 80% urbanized over the next 10 or 15 years.
Well, how about this, though? I can't remember the most recent figures for Canada, but we're probably barely replacing ourselves, if at all, maybe a little less.
We are a little less.
A little
Only
less.
the United States in the developed
Right.
world is replacing
They're over
itself.
2. Okay, so
Just 2.
But we make up for it with very high levels of immigration.
We don't fully make up.
We're what, 250,000 a year or something like that in immigration? Do they
That's
have
not
any-
enough. That's,
Okay, but do they have any immigration
No.
to speak of in China
No.
at all?
No.
So that's not an option.
no, that's not an option, and the Chinese are not good at it. Chinese are actually ethnically homogeneous. 90% of China is Han Chinese. They're not good at
The other.
and they're not good at having the other live amongst themselves. The Japanese are not wonderful at it either. So actually, North America, the Europeans are not marvelous at it. North America, the United States, and Canada have a tremendous advantage that we are well practiced in welcoming people from different parts of the world to our country and making people feel welcome. For the Chinese, that's really not an option.
So in our last 30 seconds here, are they officially reevaluating the one-child policy?
Yes.
They are now.
Yes, because they know they are in this race against time, that they become rich before they become old. And it's not a long time period, Steve. We're talking the next 30 years, that's all.
Okay. Janice, thank you again for today, and we'll do it 3 more times this week, once again tomorrow.
Good.